You know, the reason I'm here with you is because my question, we're here at the Casa Monica. Today is August the 31st, starting a new month. And I think one of the big, we've had great events here in town, like the bell here from the Trinity Parish is sort of restored and getting ready to celebrate their 200. I saw that the Santa Maria now, they're actually going to build something. So there are a lot of great things happening in town. But I think something that sticks in the eye of everybody is what's going around the monument.
Right.
And so my question basically is, how has that journey been? And though there was discussion for a while, and I guess the city's was to kind of leave it there for now until they found a solution. Do you think the whole George Floyd thing that happened in Minnesota was like kind of the straw that broke the camel's back?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the whole thing started 3 years ago, 3-4 years ago, with a movement, a national movement to relocate Confederate monuments. And, the thing is that when we looked at this before, and I spent a lot of time on this and studied the cult of the lost cause and how these monuments came into play. Not all monuments are equal. There's just, I describe it as that there's a spectrum. There's a monument that maybe we could all look at that it was so out of context and done in such a sinister fashion that we could agree about the meaning and the intent of it. A good example would be like a General Lee statue in New Orleans. General Lee had nothing to do with New Orleans. It was put up in a period, the hate speech associated with it during its inauguration or whatever. I mean, we could look at that and we could agree.
Right.
And we'll call that one end of the spectrum. And then at the other end of the spectrum are memorials or monuments like the one in the Plaza de la Constitution, which originated in 1872 by grieving mothers and widows and families for their lost sons and husbands in the war. And there's, I believe there's 44 names of individuals that fought on the Confederate side that the memorial is to memorialize. And you look at that, and I think as humans we could all understand the need for that in your life and at a human level, whatever was your position in the war. And so we can look at that, and we could come from different perspectives, have different lenses, and see something different.
Right.
And so a person can look at that and say, well, that's a memorial to 44 souls. There's no specific references to the Confederacy. And you could look at it from another lens and say it doesn't matter. It's still it still symbolizes hate. And the analogy that I use is if I took a sheet of paper and I drew a 6 on it, and I see a 6, I'd ask you what you see, and you would see a 9.
Right.
And we're both looking at exactly the same thing, and we're both right. And we both have a valid point of view. And if we could both agree that our views are valid and where do we go from here, then that was the theory behind contextualization. So the idea was that the city memorial wasn't really equal to like a General Lee in New Orleans. And so the city commission, based on my recommendation at the time, had been to add more, to tell the fuller, richer story about the memorial, and that was the contextualization effort. And the idea behind that was for people to come together and have discussions and see that there's different ways to view the same thing. And I think with George Floyd, then that triggered that, and it brought out that in reality, in our example, and I think most examples of contextualization, that it doesn't really do much to move the conversation in any direction. And what I discovered is that with a new emphasis on the need for dealing with Black Lives Matter and social justice, racial equity, all the topics, what I discovered was that after 3 years, that the memorial or monument, whatever you want to call it, it represented exactly the same thing to all parties, exactly as it was before contextualization. So to people of color, the memorial represented, you may have 44 names, but it had its history of being moved in 1879 from a private location on Catholic-owned land to the center of the plaza. Its genesis of that move was very much of the early movement of the cult of the lost cause and moving towards the Jim Crow period. And so for them, and for many, many others, not just people of color, it still represents a symbol of the Confederacy and what that represented and hate.
Right.
So it didn't, the plaques and contextualization didn't change any of that because nothing in society had changed for them. If anything, things were getting worse,
right,
as epitomized by the tragedy of George Floyd and many, many others.
Right.
So, and then on the other side, what I discovered is that the whole argument about these is that they were built and they were put deliberately on publicly owned land to send a message that we may have lost the war, but our cause is not dead,
But we're still in
and
control.
we're still in control, and
Right.
we're still in charge. And the way that you know that is that we have the quasi-endorsement of the government. And so the whole argument of this isn't about tearing them down necessarily. It's about relocating them to private land.
Right.
So for people who are at the other extreme end of the spectrum, some of the deepest white supremacists,
Right.
well, they would come up to me when there were some new protests after George Floyd. They would come up to me and they would say, "We're so glad that you see it our way." And it's like, what do you mean? We went through this whole exercise, contextualization. Well, you didn't move it, so you see it our way. And so it represented, and it was still symbolic of the power structure, and that the intrinsic white supremacist racism and institutional racism
Yeah.
wasn't being dismantled.
Right, because you see then the history of St. Augustine in the 60s.
Right.
Martin Luther King here, with Andrew Young, with, St. Augustine was a really hot potato, like Birmingham or other cities where you could see the struggle on the lens, the rabbis arrested, there's many things. So that sort of power struggle was still there. So where is this going to be moved to?
So the next decision point of the commission was to relocate the memorial.
Mm-hmm.
And we are relocating the memorial to privately owned land out at what's called Trout Creek Fish Camp. It's out near St. John's River. It's owned by a gentleman by the name of Randy Ringhaver, who was very gracious to offer the ability to relocate it to private land, so that for people that wanted to still be able to respect the memorial and their ancestors, and to not lose our history, that he's making that a possibility.
Right. That's cool. Is anything going to go in place of the memorial here in the plaza?
Well, there's a lot of conversation about that. I think right now, after we move the memorial, we'll restore the site with some grass or some bushes or until the community figures out what is appropriate to go back. I think that you will see something go back. I think that this is too profound of an issue to not have something go back. And I think the exercise of building something together where there's a blank canvas, if you will,
Right.
and how the city moves forward with the community of how we build something at that location that is where people can come to it as more validated and equal.
A place of peace.
A place of peace, right.
A place where you
Yeah, and I think it's important that it be a blank canvas. I know that there's a lot of discussions about repurposing the existing structure, but that doesn't really work for either side. And I have spent time with both sides talking about those possibilities, it just doesn't really work.
Right.
And so I think the commission made a wise decision to relocate the existing memorial and start with a blank canvas. And I think the next step is also to spend time educating, working on educating the community about what was the memorial, the history of the memorial, what does it represent, and why does it affect people of colors so significantly, and how does it hold us back, and how do these symbols in the community hold us back?
Right.
And if there's any question about what it represents to people, just go out on a Sunday during these protests and listen to the hate and the racism that is coming out and emerging. And it is scary, and it's playing itself out all around the country.
Yeah.
So
Americans versus Americans.
yeah. So what that structure represented to different parties is very real. It's not just stone.
So you think after it's removed, after the space is left there for a while the community considers what should go there, you think the community then goes into a period of some sort of healing?
I think so, and I think that we have to make this can't be an exercise for nothing. It can't be about just moving the memorial and then going back to business as usual. There has to be an organized approach to this. And one of the things that I'm doing, I don't want to get too far ahead of the immediate task, because as you said, it is August 31st, 2020, and we are working on still moving the structure. So you have to stay focused on first things first.
Right.
But I'm starting to have some conversations with people about how do we move forward, and looking at some example cities that are ahead of us in dealing with some of these topics. And so I do think that we do need to put a concerted effort into it. And it's going to take a lot of hard work, and there's going to be joy, there's going to be pain, there's going to be a little bit of everything. But just to let you know that how our city commission feels is that reconciling this topic and working on these issues has become one of the single most important agendas of the strategic plan of the city itself. So the coming year, I think you're going to see a lot of things emerge about how to have community conversations, what are the actions of the city itself that can demonstrate a commitment to social equity and inclusiveness, and addressing structural racism, and basically saying racism is not to be tolerated.
So, wow, I thank you. Oh, one more question. When do you think the project will end, where the memorial will be totally removed?
I think it's going to take another 2 weeks.
Okay, all right, August 31st. All right.
Yeah, we have to change our approach, because there was a discovery that the memorial sits on slabs of granite. And these granite pieces are 16 inches thick into the ground, 5 feet wide by 10 feet long. They're huge pieces of granite. And I think it'll be interesting one day to figure out where this granite came from. I'm wondering if it was leftover granite from the 1840s seawall construction.
From the mountains of Florida.
Yeah, because they brought down granite, to do the granite topping on the seawall. But these are significant pieces, and so what it did is that 16 inches has changed the dimension of the height of the base.
Have they found anything archaeological? Anything that was buried there, like
no.
time capsule kind of thing?
Not yet. We plan to do some additional archaeology work after the memorial is removed, when it's just easier to access what was underneath, what was around it. But these granite have changed the height and of moving the bottom part of the memorial down the highway.
Oh, wow.
And so we're currently looking at some other options that might be more favorable to moving to the Trout Creek Fish Camp by using a barge and taking it by water.
Wow.
So it's hard to appreciate how many utility lines cross a highway between here and Trout Creek, but it's almost 200.
Oh, wow.
And so the 16 inches made a huge difference.
Right.
And so we're working through that. Yeah, got a whole team working on that.
Yeah.
And we have a wonderful contractor, Jeremy Patterson, who leads his team, is just probably one of the best in the business in the country.
Well, I thank you for this time. I thank you to talk frankly about something that's become very sensitive. And I think, like you, I hope for the best. I hope for moving forward in a positive and like a family, move forward.
Yep.
Like a big family we are. Thank you again.
Well, thank you.